Hello friend, welcome back to Acre Homestead. I've got a very busy day today of food preservation. So what I need is a very easy dinner. And today we are going to be making a crock pot dinner. There needs to be one thing to be done in order to make this dinner, and that is to brown 1 pound of hamburger. While that is browning on the stove, I'm going to get going on some of the veggies that we need for the soup. We are going to be making 5 crock pot dinners. I don't use my crock pot very much, and I was so inspired by the 5 instant pot dinners we did. I thought, let's try the same thing with the crock pot. So I have all my recipes planned out, and the first one, because I'm gonna be in the kitchen all day today, I thought a nice soup would be good because it's a little bit cooler out there today, if you can believe it or not. And I've got to be doing a ton of food preservation. This one basket is just what I harvested this morning. And so this is just some of the abundance that we are going to be working with today. And 'tis the season of food preservation season, so I need recipes that are going to be easy, fast, and really delicious. So the first thing we need to do is shred up 3/4 of a cup of carrots. I'll link all these recipes down below. I went out into the garden this morning and I picked some carrots to see how the carrots out in the garden are doing, and they are not quite ready to be harvested yet. So I just have some store-bought carrots here, but I do have some homegrown celery that I was able to harvest this morning. I don't even think I mentioned what we're making for dinner tonight. We are making a potato creamy hamburger soup, and all the recipes that I'm making this week are brand new to me, and I will link them all down below. And I'm excited just to see how well we like using the crock pot. The way I usually use my crock pot is I make roast in it and I make broth in it, and that's about it. So we're gonna kind of just get out of our comfort zone and see if we like using the crock pot. I typically use my stove and my oven more, but I had so much fun with the instant pot recipes. I thought, let's see if we can get inspired and try some new things in the crock pot. So tonight we're making soup. Tomorrow we're gonna make a Cajun Alfredo pasta. We make Mongolian beef. We also make a taco bake, and then we make peach cobbler in the crock pot. So this is gonna be a fun week. I hope you enjoy hanging out with me as we make these brand new recipes. It's cooked through. I'm just taking a paper towel and using it to kind of soak up any of the excess grease. This is grass-fed beef from a local farmer, so it's not super greasy, but I don't want any extra in my soup, so I'm gonna go ahead and toss this. And now we can assemble our soup. So to the crock pot, I'm gonna add our ground beef. Our carrot, celery, and our garlic. I already had some pre-diced onion in the fridge, so I'm going to add onion. And I didn't even have to dice that today. 3 cups of chicken broth. And potatoes. These are potatoes that I grew last year and I canned up, and I'm gonna get those in there as well. The recipe calls for fresh potatoes, diced and peeled, but I don't have any of those. The ones in the garden are still growing, and I have these, so I want to use these up. So I'm gonna mix everything together, and then we're gonna get the lid on it, and it already smells really good. You can cook this recipe on low or high. I'm gonna cook it on low today because I'm just gonna be in the kitchen all day. So now dinner is almost completely done. It has a few more ingredients we're gonna add, but we're gonna add those toward the end. So for now, I'm just gonna let it sit and cook for a good about 6 hours. I just finished up a huge food preservation day, and now we're gonna put the finishing touches on this soup. I'm really excited to have this. I've been smelling it all day, and it smells so yummy. So what we need to do is make a roux. We're gonna make like a white sauce to kind of thicken the soup a little bit. A lot of crock pot recipes call for cream of chicken or cream of soups, And we're basically making a homemade version of that. So instead of opening a can, we're gonna whip this up together really quickly. So I'm gonna melt some butter and some flour together. And then we're gonna mix in some milk. But I need to let this cook together first. I'm gonna move my preserves to the side. So we're gonna let the butter melt and the flour cook. So our sauce is thickened up a ton. So now we're gonna add 2 ounces of cream cheese, and we're gonna have that melt in there. You can see how thick this is. This is just like a can of cream of soup. It's just homemade. In some of the other recipes, I'll be showing you how to make cream of chicken and a cream of, well, I don't think we're gonna do cream of mushroom, but I do have a recipe on that. So we're basically making a cream of cheese soup here. So I just added some cheddar cheese, so I'm gonna mix that in. The stove is off, and I'm just gonna have all of this melt and come together. This is what the soup is looking like after cooking for many hours. It smells so rich and beautiful. The potatoes are tender, the veggies are tender. So now we're gonna add our cream of cheese into this. You can see how nice and creamy this is now. The original recipe that I'm basing this recipe off called for Velveeta cheese. Well, I don't have that, and I never have that in my house, so I just substituted a mild-ish cheddar cheese, one that's gonna have a good melting point. So now we're gonna add this to our soup. And now that that's all stirred in, we're gonna let this cook for about another 30 minutes or so. To go with tonight's dinner, I have some zucchini cheddar biscuits from the freezer, and I'm gonna bake these up to go with dinner. I just took the zucchini cheddar biscuits out of the oven, and they smell and look incredible. So now we can dish up our soup and give it a try. We can see if we need to adjust any of the seasonings. I think this would be really good with a little bit of green onion on the top. But I don't have any right now, so we're just gonna go like this. It looks incredible. It smells so rich and delicious. This will be so yummy with the biscuit dipped into it. Now I know that probably didn't need cheddar biscuits with soup that has cheese in it, but those are the biscuits I had in the freezer, and I wanted something easy to go along with dinner. Let's give this a try. You can see if we need to add any more pepper or salt. I think a little bit of fresh black pepper on the top of this would be really good. It's really good, really rich, creamy, comforting. I don't make soup with ground beef in it very often, and that's really good. It's a really unique take on this soup. This would be really good too, vegetarian, without the ground beef, even though this is hamburger soup. If it was just a cheesy potato and you made it exactly the same, except leave out the beef and maybe throw in some really diced up broccoli, this would be really good too. That's how you could make it into a vegetarian version of this. It's very hot. I'm gonna call Josh in for dinner. We're gonna enjoy this for dinner, and I will see you next time I make dinner in the crock pot. Good morning, we are at it again. We are gonna make Cajun Alfredo in the crock pot. And the cool thing about this recipe is you cook the pasta in the crock pot. I've never done this before, and I'm really excited to give it a try and see how it goes. So we need to brown our chicken first and our sausage. The recipe calls for cooked Cajun sausage. I don't have that, mine is still raw. So I want to brown this before I put it in the crock pot. And then I have 2 chicken breasts here. So what I'm gonna do is while this pan is heating up, I'm gonna salt each side of the chicken breast. And I'm gonna put some pepper on it too. And then once I put it in here, I'll put it seasoned side down, and then I can season the other side of it. I think this is the key when making crock pot recipes, is because I don't have a lot of experience, is browning the meat first so that you get that taste of the browned meat instead of it just kind of steaming in the crock pot. Since we're making Cajun pasta, I'm gonna add a little bit of Cajun seasoning to this chicken on this side as well. We don't have to fully cook this chicken because we're gonna cook it in the crock pot. We're just looking to get a nice brown color on it. I think I need a little bit more oil on the chicken before I flip it. You all have seen me do this before, but I think this is a really important step, so I don't want to skip it. The recipe originally does not say to do this, but I am going to take some of the broth that the recipe calls for, and I'm going to deglaze the pan. I need to use this pan to brown my sausage, and if I was to put my sausage into that pan with those brown bits were going to burn before my sausage could get browned, and I didn't want to waste those brown bits because that's flavor. So I just took some of the broth and deglazed the pan with it, and then I poured that into the crock pot. So we, 1, kind of cleaned the pan so that I could brown the sausage, and 2, we are keeping that flavor in our dinner tonight. So I'm going to cook both sides of this sausage until it's nice and browned. It does not have to be fully cooked because, again, we are going to put it in the crock pot and we are going to fully cook it in the crock pot. And then I'm going to go ahead and deglaze the pan again. I will get that broth into the crock pot and we will continue to finish this recipe. This recipe is really, really good and one of the favorites that I made during this week. Now that we have our meat cooked, we need to add the rest of the ingredients. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of Cajun spice. And then we're going to add the remaining of the chicken broth. This is why I wanted to brown everything, so it would have that nice brown texture and not just cooked in the broth. We're gonna add garlic, those are our pre-chopped garlic, and heavy cream. Now we can put the lid on and we're gonna cook this on high for 2 to 3 hours, or you could cook it on low for 4 hours. I want to get dinner on the table, so I'm going to go ahead and cook this on high. We're going to set this aside. I've got a bunch of food preservation projects again I need to do. 'Tis the season. There's some stuff right there. I need to go out to the garden and harvest a bunch of things. So our dinner is cooking for me while I'm doing other things. I almost forgot the butter. What would Alfredo be without butter? This is smelling divine. But what I need to do now is take the internal temperature of our chicken, and it's at 169, which is perfect. That's what we want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this chicken into pieces. The nice thing is we didn't completely cook it to where the chicken is just gonna turn into just complete shreds. I like when the chicken has a little bit more texture to it, but it's still gonna be really tender because it still has time to cook. So I'm gonna stick the chicken, I'm gonna leave the sausage in, and then we're gonna add 1 box of rigatoni, and we're supposed to add a 1/2 cup of water to this. I think I'm gonna wait on the water, and if I feel like it needs a little bit more liquid, then I'll add the liquid. Now we're gonna cut our chicken into bite-sized pieces. I really like that it has some texture to it. I'm happy about this. It tastes incredible. I did just take a taste of it. Now we're gonna put this back into the crock pot. Now we're gonna put the lid on and let it cook for at least 30 minutes. I wanna check on this pasta to see if I need to add that half a cup of water, but I also need to add our Parmesan cheese, and I'm gonna stir this in and see how the noodles are doing. You know, I don't think we need to add any liquid. Can you see that there's definitely still liquid in there? So I'm glad I did not add that half a cup of water. We're gonna add the cheese, we're gonna let the cheese melt and thicken up this sauce a little bit. The noodles feel like they are almost done. I think this pasta is done. Oh yeah, that's perfect. The cheese thickened up that sauce beautifully. The pasta is nice and tender. So let's dish this up, give it a taste test. Tell me, are you a little fork person or a big fork person? Josh and I are not on the same page when it comes to what size forks we like. So tell me what you think. I'm team I'm team big fork, little spoon, and Josh is the opposite. He's team little fork, big spoon. So it works out perfect for us. That is so delicious. This is so good. I cannot wait for Josh to try it. I was worried it was gonna be a little bit spicy because the Cajun, but I think it's perfect. I don't think it needs any more cheese either. I think the amount of cheese that I put on it to begin with is perfect. Here's tonight's dinner, Cajun Alfredo pasta in the crock pot with our cucumber salad. I'm gonna dish that up for us, and that is gonna be delicious. Good morning, friend. It is the next week, and it is another crock pot recipe. It's another day of food preservation. Thus, I'm pulling out the crock pot to make Korean beef in the crock pot. I thawed a chuck roast yesterday, and this morning I went ahead and I took off the bones and I cut off any really big pieces of fat off this chuck roast so that it would be easier to shred when this recipe is done. Now I am cutting it into bite-sized pieces and I'm getting it into the crock pot. And this is gonna be probably the easiest recipe we have made so far because it's a kind of dump and go recipe. The next recipe we're gonna be making tomorrow, or whenever I get to making a crock pot recipe, is going to be a Mexican bean and rice recipe. So I'm actually gonna do, surprisingly, some of the prep today for tomorrow's recipe. Now that we have our chuck roast pieces in our crock pot, we're gonna make the sauce. I chose chuck roast because when chuck roast slow cooks, it falls apart and it becomes so tender and delicious. So that is in here, and my chuck roast was a little bit smaller than this recipe calls for, so I'm actually gonna be cutting the sauce in half. I will link this recipe down below. We're gonna start with some broth, and I don't have any small jars of beef broth. I only have quarts, so I'm gonna make some with this home freeze-dried broth powder. So if you have a can of beef broth or some bouillon powder, go ahead and use that. This just happens to be some homemade. So just like that, we have some homemade broth reconstituted. Now I'm gonna add brown sugar. Soy sauce, onion powder. This is home freeze-dried onion powder. Gochugaru, which is a Korean red pepper flake. And I am out of rice wine vinegar, but I have some of this homemade chive vinegar, so I'm gonna use that instead. We're gonna mix this together. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just salt and pepper the beef a little bit. Now we're gonna pour our sauce over the beef. Now I'm gonna put the lid on and we're gonna cook this on low for 6 to 8 hours until this meat is fall apart tender. I basically have dinner going We only need to do a few more things and dinner is going to be done while I'm in the kitchen doing a bunch of food preservation projects. See you back in 8 hours. I almost forgot garlic, so I just threw a chunk of frozen garlic in there. As soon as that thaws, I'll just stir it in. Another reason I'm grateful for a crock pot recipe today is it's supposed to be 105 degrees today. So I didn't want to do any other cooking on the stove or anything like that, heating my house up. The food preservation projects that I'm going to be getting to will do that enough. Now that dinner is almost ready, it's been smelling delicious, cooking away. This was another one of our favorites. It was so good. I thought that it's almost done, so let's get some rice cooked, and I'm going to go ahead and get it cooked in the Instant Pot. Now I need rice, pre-cooked rice for the next recipe we're going to make, so this worked out perfect. I could prep it for dinner tonight, and then I could also prep it for the next dinner we're going to be making. So I've got 3 cups of rice. I'm going to add the water to the Instant Pot, and all I'm going to do is push the rice button on the Instant Pot, and it cooks rice beautifully every time. Dinner is done. I had a very busy day in this kitchen today. So I actually took this crock pot and I put it in my pantry because it's got a plug, and this is perfect. So this recipe that I found online said you can make a cornstarch slurry to thicken the sauce. This sauce looks thick enough to me. So let me pull you in and show you what this looks like. It is fall apart tender. Because I took time to cut away most of the fat, you can see how just tender and beautiful it is. There isn't much fat on this, so this is perfect. The sauce is nice and thick. So I ran out to the garden and I grabbed some green onions and some fresh cilantro to top our dinner with. I'm just gonna run a knife through this and do a nice rough chop. This is probably one of our new favorite recipes. It was so good and so easy. This would be good any time of year. It was what I think of a true easy crock pot meal, just dump and go, and this took less than 10 minutes to put together. It's not quite dinner time, but I want to give this a taste test to see if I need to adjust any of the seasonings. Let's see what it tastes like. Perfect. Absolute winner. I'm not going to do anything to it. I'm going to put the lid on. I'm going to put it on keep warm. And next time we're in the kitchen, we need to use some of leftover rice. I needed to make extra today so that next time we make a crock pot meal, we are going to make a chicken Mexican bake. And then I wanted to mention the Cajun Alfredo. Josh loved it. It was so delicious. I would even do it next time with just chicken and do the Cajun seasoning and all that. It was perfect. I like how I cooked the chicken. It wasn't overcooked. It wasn't completely shredded to nothing. It had a perfect texture and it was just really delicious. So I will see you next time we're in the kitchen making the Mexican bake. Good morning. We are back at it. Another crock pot recipe. This is Southwest crock pot chicken and rice. The recipe that I found for this calls for chicken breast. I have thawed chicken thighs out, so we're gonna put 3 chicken thighs at the bottom of our crock pot. And I'm gonna adapt this recipe a little bit because I have so many garden fresh produce that's coming out of the garden right now. This recipe calls for a lot of canned items, and since I have fresh, I'm just gonna go ahead and use fresh. So the first thing we need to do is put this meat in the crock pot at the bottom. So I have that in here. I went ahead and turned on the crock pot so that it can just start getting warm while we chop these vegetables. So I have 1 onion. This is kind of a small onion from the garden, but it will work for what we need. And then it calls for 1 can of diced tomatoes. I already pre-washed all these veggies. I'm going to go ahead and get these tomatoes from the garden chopped up, and we'll use these in place of a can of diced tomatoes. And it also calls for a can of chilies. Well, I have some poblano peppers from the garden, so I'm going to use those instead. So we're using this recipe as a kind of just a guide. That actually looks like it's probably about 1 can of tomatoes, so I'm gonna not put these ones in. We are also gonna need some black beans. I have some homegrown, home-canned black beans here. I'm gonna get these opened and drained and rinsed to go into the crock pot. I'm gonna go ahead and season up our chicken just a little bit. I also did cut off any excess fat from these chicken thighs just so that we wouldn't bite into that. And now we need to add our peppers. And we're just gonna layer this all the veggies on top of the chicken, onions, the tomatoes, I have a bag of frozen corn. I'm gonna put about 2 handfuls in there on top. It said 1 can, but I don't have canned corn, so I'm just using frozen. Now we're gonna sprinkle our beans on the top of that. I'm gonna cover the lid for just a minute while we make our cream of chicken soup. This recipe calls for a can of cream of chicken soup. I don't have a can, but I have a recipe to make it, and it's so easy and delicious. So we're just gonna make it from homemade. Those are all the tomatoes I just harvested this morning, so it's gonna be a busy day today working on getting that stuff preserved up. So an easy crock pot meal sounds like a win to me. So we're gonna get the oven or the stove going. I just have a little pot here. I've got about 6 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna put that in our pot along with 6 tablespoons of flour. We're gonna let the butter and the flour melt and cook for a minute together. Now that our butter and flour are cooked together, I pre-measured out 1 cup of chicken broth and 1 cup of milk. And we're gonna cook this together until it thickens. While this is thickening, I'm gonna add the rest of the seasonings. We've got garlic powder, cumin, smoked paprika, a little bit of coriander, and some onion powder. I'm also going to add some salt, and you can see how this is starting to thicken up a little bit. I'm going to let it thicken a little more, and then it's done. I do want to give this a taste test before we put it on our chicken. So the way the recipe was originally written was you take a can of cream of chicken soup, you dump that into a bowl, you add some milk, and you add your seasonings to it. So I just added everything in the pot. Ooh, that's delicious. That is really good. So now that our sauce is nice and thick, you can see how thick it is. We're gonna pour it over our chicken and our veggies. If you've never made a homemade cream of chicken, this is kind of a Southwest style cream of chicken because we added all those yummy flavors to it. But if you've never made that before, cream of chicken, it's really, really easy. It's just simple ingredients. I like to make it because I make my own homemade broth, and so it's a lot more cost effective to make it because I have all the ingredients on hand and I can control the ingredients. But if you don't want to make it homemade, don't worry about that. Just go get yourself a can of cream of chicken soup and follow the recipe as written. So I'm gonna put this on the top, and now dinner is basically done. There's a few more ingredients we're gonna do to this. Now this is a recipe I've never tried before, so I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm gonna put it on high, and it says that it should cook on high for 3 to 4 hours or on low for 6 to 8 hours. So I'm excited to see if we like this. We are gonna still add some rice and some cheese at the end, and then we'll see. I'm excited to give this a try. you can see all that stuff in the background. That is all the projects that I have in store for me. So I have my work cut out for me today. So I'm glad to have, that probably took less than 10 minutes to put together. Longest part was chopping the vegetables. So I'm excited about that. We'll see you back in a few hours. I checked the chicken's temperature and it is done. It's 165. It smells really good. So what I need to do now is take the chicken and kind of pull it apart, and I'm going to break it up and kind of shred it. And the recipe says to pull the chicken all the way out, but I don't want to get another thing dirty. So I'm just going to do it right in here. Because it's so tender, it's just falling apart. It's kind of soupy now, but we do have a couple more ingredients to add. Now that the chicken is kind of bite-sized, we're going to add the rest of the ingredients. I have 3 cups of pre-cooked rice. I cooked this rice when I made the last recipe. I knew I wanted to make this one, so I went ahead and made a little bit extra. So we could put this in here. And then I'm also gonna add 1 cup of cheddar cheese, and we're gonna mix that in. I wanna make sure that cheddar cheese gets mixed in well. Now we're going to add the rest of the cheddar cheese on top. Now we're going to put the lid on. We're going to let the rice warm through and the cheese melt. And that is dinner. So I'm excited to give this a try. It's a little bit soupier than I was expecting. So I'm hoping that the rice will kind of absorb some of that moisture. And I think I'm going to go downstairs and open a bag of chips and grab a bag of chips so we could eat this maybe with some chips or something. Smells really good. It's been about an hour since we mixed the rice in and the cheese on top, so I thought it would be good to give it a try. I was thinking earlier I should have probably tried this before I put the cheese on top and the lid on top to see if it needed any salt or pepper, because we used homemade cream of chicken. It doesn't have as much salt in it, so I didn't really think about that. But this is actually thickened up more than I thought it would have. It smells really good. It's still a little bit on the thin side, but it definitely thickened up quite a bit. So let's give this a taste test. It's basically like rice and beans, like a burrito bowl kind of, just all in one crock pot. It's really good. I do think it could use a little bit more salt, but that's my fault for not seasoning it or tasting it before I put the cheese in. So I'll just let Josh know that, you know, the way we're gonna eat it actually is with some chips. So to serve along with this, I pulled out a bag of chips, and we've got some pickled onions that we can top it with. We've got a little bit of hot sauce, some sour cream, and some cilantro from the garden. The next recipe we are going to be making in the crock pot is actually a dessert. We're going to be making peach cobbler, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've got the peaches, I've got the butter. Let's make peach cobbler. I'm really excited to try this recipe because I've always wanted to try making dessert in a crock pot before. I've never done it, and so this is going to be fun. So I have a half a cup of butter that I melted, and I'm supposed to put that at the bottom of the crock pot. And now we need to bake our batter. The batter should come together really, really quickly. We need 1 cup of milk, a cup of flour, a half a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. This is a half teaspoon, so I'm gonna add 4 of these. I'm gonna kind of mix that in with the flour just a little bit. Cinnamon and salt. Now this recipe calls for 1 cup of sugar. I'm reducing the sugar down just a little bit because I'm gonna serve this over vanilla ice cream. And it does not call for salt, but I always put salt in my desserts because I think it helps balance the flavor. Now we're supposed to pour this batter over top of the butter. Now I have some home canned peaches. I canned these in 2021. This is a great way to use them up. And I'm gonna strain off some of the juice. I'm just gonna set these in our batter. It was that easy to put this together, so I hope this turns out, because if it does, how nice is it to have this easy dessert in our arsenal. So now what it said to do is cover the crock pot with a paper towel or a cloth to help absorb the condensation so that your cobbler can set properly. And I put it on high, and we're gonna let it sit on high for anywhere for an hour and a half to 2 hours. It said just let cook until set. I have some vanilla ice cream in my freezer, and so I will see you back when this is done. This smells incredible, but it did take about 3 hours to cook, so it took quite a bit longer. I could not, in the hour and a half or 2 hours that the recipe said, I couldn't get the center to set, because another thing it said is that the cobbler had to be set. And I'm really curious to know if this is gonna be any good or not. I'm hoping that it didn't burn around the outside, because it took so much longer to get the center cooked that I'm worried that the outside, the sugars might have got too caramelized. So let's dig into this and see how well we did. It looks kind of interesting. Ooh, it's caramelized on the bottom. It almost smells like it's brown sugar, I think, because of the caramelization that we got on it. Oh yeah, that looks great. It's not burnt, I think, any longer, and it would be a little bit questionable, but I think that this is fine. So that's what it's looking like. So let's give this a try and see how it is. Growing up, my mom always made crisps. She never made cobbler, because that's what she prefers. And I don't think I ever actually had a cobbler until I was an adult. And I think I actually like cobbler better, but this is not at all how I normally make it. Normally it's almost like a biscuit that you put on the top when I make peach cobbler. And this is kind of more like a dumpling. It's more like it's steamed in the crock pot versus in the oven, except the outside, let me show you, where right there, that's not burnt. It looks darker for you guys than it does for me, but that's just caramelized from the crock pot. Any longer though, and that was on the verge of being burnt. This is so hot, but I wanted to get a little bit of ice cream, a little bit of peach, and a little bit of our dumpling. It smells so good. I'm just waiting for it to cool down. I have so many canned peaches downstairs that I could make this whenever I want to, but I could also make it in the oven too. This is just kind of a fun experiment. I just tasted the biscuit part. Really good. That's really good. That's really good. I am so glad that I cut the sweetness in half. The recipe called for 1 whole cup of sugar. That would have been way too sweet. The 1/2 cup of sugar is plenty sweet. This is really good. The peach is really hot. Okay, I need to set this down. That is delicious. I think I prefer it in the oven as opposed to just the texture overall. I kind of do like the doughy texture, but I think I like it in the oven better. Could just be this recipe too. I don't know. It's really good. We will enjoy this. It'll make a really good breakfast. I've got some bacon in the refrigerator, or not in the refrigerator, in the freezer that's already pre-cooked. I think I'm gonna warm that up. We can have this for breakfast tomorrow, and that's gonna be fantastic. Friend, thank you so much for joining me for these 4 dinner crockpot recipes and this 1 dessert recipe. I am not a crockpot expert user. These were all brand new recipes to me, and I don't use my crockpot very much. So this is kind of fun to kind of test out the waters and try some different techniques and see how I like it. I think in general, I still prefer using my stove or my oven as opposed to the crockpot, but it doesn't hurt to kind of stretch my different, culinary techniques for different scenarios, just depending on what's happening in life. I think one of my favorite things that I did in the crockpot was that Mongolian beef, just cooking beef slow in the crockpot. I know that it does that really well. That's one thing the crockpot does do well. And so it's been a great week. So thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this and you want to watch 5 Instant Pot recipes, I can put that video right here. And if you want to watch some garden stuff, because I've been talking about all these garden things I've been doing, I'll put a garden video right here for you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. And I can't wait to see you next time. Bye, friend.